Welcome to the third episode of Running with Wolves, a podcast about dogs and all they can reveal to us about being human. Don't judge a book by its cover is generally a good advice unless the book is about a dog. A dog appearance can reveal important clues about its social behavior, its communication skills, and even its dialect. So stay with me because by the end of this episode, you'll never look at a dog or the way they communicate quite the same way again. Dogs are the most physically diverse mammal species on Earth. A Siberian Husky and a Cavalier King's Charles Spaniel are both Canis lupofamiliaris, aka dogs. When you really think about it, it's kind of insane. One still looks remarkably similar to a wolf, the other one has a completely different skull, body shape, and size. And because dogs communicate through their bodies, as humans change their physical design, we also change the physical machinery through which they communicate. Think about the amount of information carried by a long tail. A dog can raise it, lower it, tuck it, hold it rigid, curve it softly, move it rapidly, move it slowly, wag it broadly, make extremely small movement just only with the tip, and even show a bias toward the left or right side. I wrote an entire article for my community breaking down the meaning of all these different tail signals. It's so fascinating to see how sophisticated and subtle tail communication really is. And if you want to dig deeper, join my community and go read the article. So what are the social consequences for a dog whose tail has been docked almost completely, for example? What happens when another dog meets them and loses access to all that information? Because these differences may look like cosmetic traits to us humans, but to another dog, they are communication tools, which raises an even more interesting question. What if we not only changed a dog appearances, but also the way in which they tend to communicate with others? In this episode, we are going to explore the two major ways a dog appearance can affect communication. First, different dogs use different signals and behavior pattern more frequently than others. Think about a child raised in a very quiet, reserved household with no siblings. Maybe the parents are a bit old and they live in the middle of nowhere. And then place them at a Sunday lunch with an Italian family in Naples containing 5 siblings, 2 grandparents, and 6 people speaking at the same time. Everyone possesses the same basic human communication equipment, but they use it very differently. In one family, people wait their turn, speak softly, and communicate through small changes in tone. In the other, people interrupt, gesture wildly, raises their voice, touch each other, and express everything at full volume. That child is going to feel very uncomfortable, believe me. Behavioral patterns in how dogs tend to express itself and what dogs tend to express and how they tend to say it is what I call canine dialect. Second, a dog may possess the behavior and attempt to display it, while its anatomy makes the signal harder for another dog to see or interpret. For example, a dog with a very short tail may be still moving the remaining little thing that they have, but the other dog is not seeing it. They may be saying, hey, I'm feeling unsure about you. Be cool. But the other dog may miss most of that message because, well, there is barely any message to be, there's any message to see. Or a French bulldog may be trying to say, I want to play, while the other dog sees a shortened and wrinkled face that resemble facial tension, almost no visible tail, and snorting or grumbling sounds that could be mistaken for a warning. This is what I call a communication handicap. A dialect affects the dog's expressive tendencies, and a communication handicap affects how clearly the dog body allows those expressions to be seen. And of course, both can exist in the same dog. This distinction may help explain why some dogs seem to completely misunderstand other dogs and why certain combination of breeds struggle during play. It is a bit like watching a group of Italians have a perfectly normal conversation. If you are unfamiliar with our culture, you may think that we're having a very tense argument and feel very uncomfortable. For a dog, this kind of misunderstanding carries much higher stakes since it can influence whether the dog feels the need to defend itself. Because dogs may share a species-wide language, but they speak it through bodies and behavioral tendencies that humans have transformed almost beyond recognition. Like human expression for disgust, happiness, sadness, they are all the same across the world, no matter what language you speak. But if I would change the anatomy of that face, of your face, your expression of sadness or anger or fear may be completely misinterpreted. So by the end of this episode, you will be better equipped to make good decisions about your dog's social life by having a deeper understanding of your own dog's social tendencies and other dogs' social tendencies, because you will be able to predict the social tendency of the dogs that they encounter. So to get there, we need to look at three major layers of selection that created the modern dog. The first is domestication itself, the long process that shaped the dog's fundamental adaptation to living alongside humans. The second is functional selection, which is generations of breeding for the physical and behavioral traits required to perform a particular kind of work. And the third is modern breed formation, when humans standardized dog population and intensified very specific combination of appearances and behavior. These three processes occurred at different moments in canine history, but their effect accumulated. And this is where we arrive at two slightly intimidating words that explain something fascinating: pedomorphosis and neoteny. Pedomorphosis and neoteny are a direct consequence of domestication. Neoteny is the process, and pedomorphosis is the final result. The meaning of pedomorphosis is right in the word itself. Is pedo meaning child and morphosis meaning form or transformation. Basically, pedomorphosis is when an adult animal retains the physical behavioral traits from its juvenile stages. And neoteny is the process, so it's the developmental engine that leads to pedomorphosis. And it's the slowing down of physical behavioral development relative to sexual maturity. Let's think about the differences between a human baby and an adult. A baby isn't just a tiny adult. Its head is enormous in proportion to its body. Everything is round, soft, and compact. Now imagine if that baby grew up, but those proportions barely changed. That would be a pedomorphic human. A wolf puppy has a rounded skull, a short muzzle, huge eyes, and floppy ears. As it matures into a wild adult, the muzzle lengthens, the skull becomes angular, and the ears stand up upright. But when those puppy proportions persist into adulthood, then you get a domestic dog. In other words, your dog is essentially a pedomorphic wolf frozen in childhood. Now, different species are born at very different points along their developmental timelines. A newborn of a grazing prey animal like a horse, a deer, or an antelope, they already kind of look and behave somewhat like a miniature adult. They may need to escape a predator, and they cannot spend 3 weeks lying around blind and deaf. They have eyes open, their senses are functioning, and it can usually stand and follow its mother within hours and not months from birth. These kind of animals are called precocial. Wolf puppies follow a very different timeline, and they arrive blind, deaf, unable to walk, and completely dependent on their family. They cannot even regulate their own body temperature effectively. Human babies are the same. We are also spectacularly helpless at birth. And species like ours are called altricial. So precociality and altriciality, or altriciality, I don't know how to pronounce it in English, describe how developmentally prepared an animal is at birth. So it's fair to say that pedomorphic changes may have especially far-reaching behavioral and social consequences in altricial species like ours. Since most of our sensory, motor, and neural and behavioral development happen during a long period of dependency, learning, and social care. Every mammal's brain, so our brain, a dolphin's brain, a dog's brain, we all share 7 ancient primary emotional systems. They have been mapped out by a neuroscientist named Jack Panksepp. I don't know how it's pronounced. Is the seeking system, which drives exploration and resource gathering. The fear system, which pulls the animal away from danger. The rage system, which kicks in during restraint, frustration, or threat. Lust system, which organizes mating behavior. Care, which motivates nurturing. Panic or grief, which triggers distress and cries and drives social reunion. So that's very different from fear, because panic or grief are socially related. And play, which drives joyful social learning and skill rehearsal. So anyway, think of this as the mammalian brain factory setting. So our brain original emotional operating system. As an animal grows up, learning experience and later brain development builds increasingly more sophisticated ways to regulate those raw impulses. We are learning to tolerate frustration and negotiate conflict and communicate with more diplomacy. But altricial infants like us, like wolves, we start with just the basics of these systems. A newborn puppy world is driven primarily by panic when separated from warmth or physical contact, and seeking as it's crawl to find milk. Right behind them, there is rage, which is the most primitive survival system for overcoming obstacles. In a blind, helpless puppy, rage is not dangerous, but it's simply the biological engine of frustration that gives them the push to compete with the litter mate for milk. I always like to tell my clients that frustration is nothing else but a mild form of rage. So when it accumulates, it usually goes there. But anyway, this is a story for another day. The same thing indeed applies to us. As puppies grow bigger and stronger and interact more with their social group, they acquire new ways to regulate emotion, tolerate frustration, negotiate conflict, and express what they need. These social skills are vital because they allow pack members to manage social tension without escalating every conflict into a bloodbath. So behavioral pedomorphosis essentially cuts that development short. The behavioral options available for expressing and regulating those emotions are stuck at an earlier developmental stage. Think of it this way. A toddler throwing a full-blown tantrum when frustrated is developmentally expected. But the exact same meltdown from a 12-year-old tells us that their emotional regulation and social toolkit didn't develop the way we would expect. So development adds behavioral options and sophistication. For example, wolf pups bark and yap frequently, just like adult dogs. But adult wolves, they rarely bark. So if domestication essentially freezes or slows down an animal developmental clock, what actually happened to the domestic dog's social vocabulary? And this is exactly what the Dr. Deborah Goodwin and her team set out to answer. In 1997, Dr. Goodwin, John Bradshaw, and Stephen Wickens studied social communication across 10 different dog breeds to answer a very interesting question. Do breeds that look more physically similar to wolves also display more of the visual social signals observed in wolves? Does a dog's appearance affect their social skills? The researcher looked at the established social group of dogs from breeds spanning in a very broad physical spectrum. At one end, there was the Siberian Husky with its relatively wolf-like body. And at the other end of the spectrum, there was the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel that looks like basically a cartoon dog, like round skull, short muzzle, large eyes, long floppy ears, a forever-looking puppy. And the researcher wanted to see how many of 15 classic agonistic visual signals found in the wolf repertoire they were producing. Again, they took the 15 main one. They're not just 15. There's an enormous quantity. And by agonistic, we broadly mean social behavior that are surrounding conflict, competition, threat, submission, and appeasement. So it does not simply mean fighting. Of the 15 wolf-derived agonistic behavior recorded by Goodwin, 9 were classified as threat signals, like growling, displacing another dog, standing over, inhibited biting, standing erect, body wrestling, aggressive gaping, baring the teeth, and staring. The remaining 6 were classified as submission signals, muzzle licking, looking away, crouching, the submissive grin, passive submission, and active submission. Together, these behaviors form a graded social vocabulary through which dogs can apply pressure, respond to pressure, and regulate tension before conflict escalates into a serious physical fight. So a complex visual vocabulary allows animals to negotiate social pressure without immediately resorting to biting each other. The life of a social predator like the wolf depends on family and group cooperation. An individual that escalates every disagreement into a physical fight would face greater risk of injury, social exclusion, and loss of cooperative support, all of which could reduce its chances of surviving and ultimately reproducing. So that's why in the wild, unregulated, violent individuals, the asshole's gene pool, let's call it, dries out pretty quickly. Evolution favors not simply the capacity for aggression, but the ability to regulate it through communication. Maybe humans should take a couple of notes. Here's a telling and interesting fact. Although ear movement carries a great deal of social information in canids, the researchers had to exclude ear signals from their comparison, and this is because they could not compare those movements reliably in dogs with floppy ears. And having floppy ears in the canid world is like having a speech impediment. So what did they find? They found a striking pattern. The breeds that looked more physically similar to wolves tends to display larger repertoire of wolf-type social signals. The Siberian Husky displayed all 15 behaviors recorded in the study. The Cavalier King Charles Spaniel displayed only 2, and none of those were of appeasement. And the breeds with the smallest behavioral repertoire tended to display only the signal that appear earlier in wolf puppies. If you ever wondered why small dogs, like lap dogs, usually tend to be the snappiest or very quick to aggressive displays, snapping and barking, this may be a good explanation, is because developmentally they don't have access to appeasing signals. And as the repertoire became larger, progressively later developing signal, such as appeasement signal, appeared. The pattern looked like a developmental sequence. The researcher interpreted this as an evidence of behavioral pedomorphism within the agonistic communication system. In simple terms, the adult dog with the most physically juvenile appearance also tended to retain more juvenile wolf-type social signals. So we can say that physical pedomorphosis and behavioral pedomorphosis appear to occur together in the domestic dog. So this study gives us a fascinating pattern with some very revealing exceptions. Several working breeds displayed more wolf-type social behavior than their physical appearance predicted, while others the opposite, like gun dogs were particularly interesting. Golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers, and Cocker spaniels all displayed comparatively a broad repertoire despite having a more pedomorphic physical characteristic. And Goodwin and her colleagues suggested that their working history may have helped preserve a larger social repertoire. Traditionally, these dogs worked in situations that required close coordination with not only human handlers, but also other dogs. So that kind of cooperative work may have favored dogs capable of navigating comparatively rich social environment, even as their physical appearances changed. Then there were breeds showing, as we said, the opposite pattern. So the German Shepherd and the Shetland Sheepdog looked more wolf-like than the size of the observed behavioral repertoire predicted. So the German Shepherd is especially interesting because its appearance can create a false impression of completely preserved ancestral behavior. The erected ears, long muzzle, body proportion, and overall silhouette looks extremely wolf-like. But that appearance partly reflects later human selection for a particular physical type. So Goodwin noted that the German Shepherd was developed from sheep herding dogs with a deliberate intention to create a physical dog that looks like a wolf. So humans can selectively build an ancestral looking body without recreating the entire ancestral behavioral repertoire underneath it. And the Golden Retriever demonstrates the reverse possibility. It has comparatively juvenile physical appearances combined with a surprisingly broad repertoire of ancestral social signals. And that gives us a crucial distinction. Physical appearance and behavioral development can respond to selection separately. So working history can preserve, amplify, reduce, or reorganize behavior in ways that physical appearance also cannot predict. And also Goodwin measured one particular side of communication, which is signal production. The researcher observed which behaviors the dog displayed, and that's it. They did not test whether a dog that rarely produce a particular signal could still recognize that signal when another dog displayed it. Because communication has two sides. There is the expressive vocabulary, so what I tend to say, and there is the receptive vocabulary, what I can understand when somebody else says it. These two vocabularies can be different. Think about a person who for some reason can't speak. They may understand a great deal more than they can express. Something similar may be possible in dogs. We don't know. In my experience, though, there is an overlap, and we can get to that later. The Goodwin study cannot tell us, but this possible asymmetry between what a dog can read and what it tends to express is also another reason I find the idea of canine dialects so useful and interesting. Because dogs share a broadly species-typical communication system, like humans do. A Chinese and Italian speaker both share a universal human language as well. We cry, we laugh, we hug, we raise our inner brow when we're angry or uncertain, and so on and so forth. But different populations may emphasize different parts of that system. So some dogs may communicate heavily through movement, Others may rely more on vocalization, posture, physical contact, or changes in distance. And selection for work adds another major layer because humans did not only change the signals dogs use to negotiate social interactions. We also selected dogs to perform a very particular and very specific piece of ancient predatory behavioral sequence. And when you get that detail, things get weird because those inherited motor patterns still appear, including when dogs interact and play with us humans and with one another. And this is when the idea and concept of canine dialects becomes very important. To understand this, we need to look at the predatory sequence. Predation in canids consists of a series of recognizable motor patterns: orient, watch, stalk, chase, grab, kill, dissect, and consume. In wild predator, these behaviors work together towards one biological outcome: eating. The animal locates prey, approaches, pursues it, captures it, kills it, processes it, and consumes it. But human rarely needed the dogs to perform that entire sequence. Instead, we selected different population of dogs to specialize in particular portions of it. That's how breeds were created. A border collie was selected to orient, stare, stalk, and control movement. A sighthound was selected to detect movement, chase, and catch. A retriever was selected to locate, approach, pick up, and carry while preserving the animal or object it retrieved. A terrier was selected to pursue, grab, kill small animals. So according to the work we needed dogs to perform, humans took an existing system of behaviors and strengthened particular components while suppressing others. We did not invent completely new behaviors from nothing. You can't do that. It won't work. That's a good life lesson right there. And those inherited tendencies remain available even when the dog is nowhere near its original work. That became genetics. A border collie will stare and stalk without you ever teaching them to do so. A sighthound will take off to chase anything that dared moving rapidly. A retriever will seek out objects to carry around the house. A terrier will grab and shake. And when they appear during interactions with other dogs, they become part of the communication problem. Imagine you're a dog walking down the street. Everyone walks normally, and then you see this guy staring at you, lowered head, still like a statue. And then he begins moving forward, slowly at first, controlled steps, one at a time. You, the dog, do not know that this guy comes from a distinguished line of sheep management professionals. You just see a creep acting threatening and weird. This guy is a border collie, and that behavior is extraordinarily normal to him. The movement of the other dog, you, has activated a motor pattern that generations and generations of selection made very easy to access. He sees another dog, freezes, lowers its body, stares directly at it, and begins to stalk. That does not guarantee that a fight will happen, but the other dog's interpretation depends on the entire sequence, its previous experiences, its temperament, and the distance between the dogs, and what the border collie does next. But it surely does create ambiguity, and ambiguity matters enormously in social communication, especially when you are carrying a deadly weapon in your mouth. We all feel safer when we can predict what the other individual is about to do. So clear signals allow dogs to choose an appropriate response. Confusing signals require them to gather more information, create distance, but most importantly, tolerate uncertainty. This is why it's important to choose well your dog playmates. Dog always incorporate elements of their predatory sequence, defensive and agonistic behavior into social play. And that's what play is for, is to learn and practice important life-saving behaviors safely. They chase each other, they stalk, grab, bite, wrestle, pin each other down, body slam each other. And if we isolate individual photographs of those behaviors, many of them could look terrifying. What allows dogs to play safely is the information surrounding those actions. Dogs use meta-communication. Meta-communication is communication about communication. It's communication about how another behavior should be interpreted. The most familiar example is the play bow, the front legs lowered towards the ground while they put the butt up. The dog may hold the position briefly, bounce out of it or immediately launch into another action. But bows frequently appear around actions that could otherwise be ambiguous, and they function almost like behavioral punctuation, like Mark Beckhoff defined it. The bow helps say what happened next, what I'm about to do, is about play. I'm playing. Dogs also communicate playful intent through exaggerated, inefficient movement. When they bounce or they curve their body, they pause, they move away and they invite pursue, they disengage and then return, they reverse roles. The dog who was chasing become the dog that being chased. That's a healthy play. A stronger dog reduces the force of its movement. A faster dog slows down enough to remain accessible. A larger dog may lower itself to the ground. That is called self-handicapping. So the dog temporarily limits part of its physical advantage, allowing the interaction to continue and be enjoyable and fun for all. So healthy play has rhythm. There is action, pause, observation, adjustment, and re-engagement. That's what I said, that when you, and also, and there's role reversal. The dogs are constantly collecting information from one another. Is the other dog still practicing? Is the other dog still, participating? Did that bite become too hard? Does my playmate want to continue? Should I slow down or can we have another round? This is why reciprocal play tells us much more than the presence or absence of rough behavior. Two dogs may wrestle, growl, bite, body slam while maintaining beautiful communication and very healthy play. Intensity alone does not define healthy play. Reciprocity, consent, and responsiveness is what defines healthy play. Inherited motor patterns shape this conversation because different dogs tend to find different forms of play rewarding. A herding dog may like to chase and herd. A terrier may use rapid grabbing and shaking movements. A bully-type dog may favor wrestling and body pressure. So individual temperament, learning, age, and physical condition and social experience all matter, obviously. But the pattern is still there. And when two dogs have compatible play dialects, communication can look effortless. They enjoy similar movements. They anticipate each other's choices. They agree about intensity. They pause and re-engage at a rhythm that works for both of them. When their dialects differ, each dog may struggle to understand why the other keeps behaving in such an unreasonable way. The chase-loving dog cannot understand why the other dog is getting freaked out about being chased. And the wrestler cannot understand why its retriever playmates just left with its feeling hurt. The herding dog is now increasingly frustrated because this dog is not moving in a controllable pattern. And being stalked, chased, pinned, or body slam is no fun if you didn't sign up for it. Vocal communication adds another layer. Dogs differ considerably in how they bark, howl, whine, growl, grumble, yelp, or produce other kind of vocalizations. The meaning of those sounds depends on their pitch, on the duration, on the rhythm, on the repetition, the intensity, and the context. Some dogs provide constant vocal commentary. Some growls extravagantly during play, others communicate far more quietly. And again, these dogs share a communication system, but they distribute information differently across its channels. A growl produced by a loose, bouncing dog carries a different information from a growl produced by a rigid, stiff dog. The meaning lives in the relationship between all those signals, and dialects become easier to negotiate through experience. So a dog that has interacted safely with dogs of different sizes, body types, play types, has more opportunities to learn that dogs can communicate in different ways. It can learn that a noisy playmate is not necessarily threatening, that a dog lying still may need a pause, that intense eye contact from one familiar individual predicts a game, maybe, while the same behavior in another context requires some distance. This kind of social learning expands the dog's interpretative flexibility. But experience can only help when the dog has access to the signal. And sometimes the central difficulty lies in the body itself. the dog may be trying to communicate clearly why its anatomy conceals it, distorts it, or reduces the information another dog can see. This is where dialect ends and communication handicaps begin. As we said, a communication handicap operates very differently from a dialect. Here, the behavior may be present, but the morphology and the physical structure of the dog changes the visibility, mobility, or information capacity of this behavior. Dogs communicate visually through their eyes, their ears, their lips, their muzzle, their facial muscles, the head position, posture, tail, coat, orientation, and also movement. And selective breeding has transformed almost every one of those structures. Comes to mind an anecdote about my previous dog. He was a very wolfy kind of dog, and he hated the French bulldogs indiscriminately and was otherwise a very socially stable dog. So when I noticed the other clients of mine, other dogs, kind of had a very hesitant or adversive reaction towards French bulldogs as well, I started wondering why. And this is how I eventually got to this study and this article, is that these dogs have literally a communication handicap. Their body posture makes them look like they're always on the offense. The wrinkled face resembles a face of someone that is angry. Wolves and people, they get very wrinkly when we are upset. Their eyes bulge like this, makes them look a little creepy to another dog. Their breathing sounds makes them sound like they're kind of low-key, always growling. Their tail doesn't allow them to say otherwise. Like if they would be at least like wagging and having a loose body, the other dog would gather that maybe that weird, creepy stare or facial expression is not the most important part of the message. And I had to condition him through a very long process to understand that French bulldogs are not constantly on the offense. So brachycephalic breeds, for example, they have these kind of handicaps. Their face conceals messages and at the same time make them be misunderstood. The body position, the wrinkles, the absence of a tail is another communication handicap. They also made an experiment in which they put a robotic dog with the tail and without the tail in front of a group of dogs. And with the long tail, if it was communicating friendliness like a wagging tail or uneasiness like a still erected tail, the dogs responded accordingly. When they saw the erected tail, they kept their distance. And when they saw a wagging tail, they approached. When the robot didn't have a tail, they didn't know what to do. And they were feeling very uncertain. And some dogs may respond to uncertainty in a way and others in different way. Also, the way different dogs carry their tail, the carriage of the tail can be very different in different breeds. The curly tail, it obscures some messages. Floppy ears, it's another communication handicap. So there is so many subtle signals that a dog can communicate to another dog, especially appeasing and calming signals. There is this researchers that saw 2,000 of these signals, and some of them can be so subtle. So when, of course, you're lacking the ability of communicating subtly, you're going to be misunderstood. Also, long hair that can conceal the face, so very puffy hair that can conceal if the dog, for example, has their hackle raised or not. Or it may look to other dogs like they're having really raised hackles when instead they're just puffy. That's called piloerection, by the way. So dogs, of course, can learn from one another. A dog that lives with a pug may become exquisitely sensitive to the signal of that particular dog, or a dog that regularly interacts with heavily coated breeds may learn to look somewhere else instead of the face to understand how this dog is feeling. But exposure alone is not automatically beneficial, because repeatedly placing your dog in a dog park, for example, where everything is overwhelming, chaotic, and interaction are pretty coercive because you're inside a dog park, you can't leave. It teaches fear and reactivity rather than familiarity. So useful social experience happens at an intensity where the dog can observe, respond, and most importantly, disengage if they want to. And this is on the handler. This is on to us. Our goal is not to force dogs to tolerate every social interaction. Our goal is to refine our own perception so that we can choose positive, healthy, and safe social interactions for our dogs. and also to observe another candidate for our dog to interact with or not, and try to understand what this dog may bringing to the plate. So what really matters is having slower introduction, shorter interactions, clear opportunities to disengage, especially for dogs with a communication handicap, like for example, the French Bulldog. We need to provide them the environment where this can happen safely, where his anatomy, it's a handicap, but we can help them out. So putting a dog like that inside a dog park, any dog for that matter, it's nonsense. So this is where appearance of another dog stops being an aesthetic thing, but becomes practical behavioral information that we can access. The canine body was also shaped inside another social relationship, because for thousands of years, they also developed within an increasingly intimate dialogue with us. Dogs, unlike any other species, is extraordinarily attentive to human gaze, gesture, body orientation, pointing even, and social availability. They monitor where we are looking. They notice whether our bodies are oriented towards them. They use human gesture to locate things in the environment, and they often change their behavior according to whether we are paying attention to them or not. Some of this specialization may even be visible in the anatomy of the dog's face. In 2019, a study conducted by Julian Kaminsky and her colleagues compared the facial anatomy and behavior of domestic dogs and gray wolves. And they found a striking difference in the musculature surrounding the eye. Domestic dogs generally possesses a muscle called the levator anguli oculi medialis, or more easily, LAUM. And this muscle raises the inner portion of the eyebrow, the movement that makes the eye appear larger and create the expression we commonly call puppy dog eyes. And in the small anatomical sample examined, this muscle was consistently well developed in the dogs, with the exception of the Siberian Husky. In fact, my previous dog, which was very wolf-like, very wolf behaving, he didn't have the puppy eye expression that Mario, my current dog, has. He had a way more adult, wolfy, not only appearance, but also demeanor. It was largely absent also in wolves. So dogs produce this inner brow movement way more frequently in a way higher intensity than wolves. So why might humans have favored this? So rising the inner eyebrow makes the canine face appear infant-like, looks like a puppy, and resemble a facial movement that we also associate sometimes with sadness or vulnerability. And that expression may elicit attention and more nurturing from us. So Kaminsky and her colleagues proposed that our responsiveness could have created the selection pressure favoring dogs that produce that movement more strongly. And this remains an evolutionary interpretation rather than a direct reconstruction of what ancient humans did, obviously. But it presents a fascinating possibility. As dogs became increasingly integrated into human social life, the physical machinery of their faces also have changed, partly in response to human observers. And dogs use their face in relation to our attention. In a separate 2017 experiment, dogs interacted with a person who either faced them or turned away. Food was also either present or absent. And the dogs produced significantly more facial movements, facial expression, when the person was visually attending to them. The inner brow raiser was among the movements associated with human attention. So the presence of food had way less influence than the person's gaze. So the dog's face is not simply reacting to something desirable in the environment. Its expressive behavior changes according to whether a human audience is available to receive it. This gives dogs' appearance a remarkable double function. The face participates in communication with other dog, and it also participates in communication with us. So dogs did not simply become reduced wolves. They become specialists in living with another species. And this brings us back to the connection between behavior and appearance. How could selecting animals for behavioral characteristics also produce changes in their bodies? So one important clue came from Dmitry Belayev and Ludmila Trutz, I think. They made this experiment in the beginning of the late 50s. They took a group of foxes and they selected them only for their tameness. So they saw that even if they were just selecting for tameness, no physical appearances across generations, very remarkably not many, the foxes became not only more approachable to people and wanted interaction from people and licking hands, whining for attention, wagging their tails, but they also had changed physical, like in pigmentation, the ear cartilage, the tail shape, the craniofacial structures. The reproductive development also changed, and the experiment demonstrated that strong selection on behavior can coincide with changes elsewhere in the body. Exactly how those changes became linked remain an open scientific question. Until 2014, in which this new research could give us an answer. Adam Wilkins and Richard Rangman, I think, and another person proposed one theory that is now very influential and is called the neural crest hypothesis. The neural crest cells are temporary population cells that migrate through the developing embryo. They contribute to several systems, including pigmentation, craniofacial structures, ear cartilage, and part also of the peripheral nervous system, and the adrenal medulla. The hypothesis proposes that selection for reduced fear and aggression may have altered the neural crest development, indirectly affecting some of the physical traits associated with domesticated animals. It's an elegant idea, but of course it's still an hypothesis, and scientists continue today to debate whether domesticated species share one consistent domestication syndrome, whether changes in the neural crest development provide a common mechanism, and how much of the variation came from later selective breeding, captivity, environmental condition, or other developmental pathways. What we can say with greater confidence is that behavior and appearance develop through interconnected biological systems, and selection acting strongly on behavior can coincide with changes elsewhere in the animal. And functional selection can then strengthen particular motor patterns, and motor breed information can exaggerate physical traits again. And the dog standing in front of us today is the accumulated result of all those histories: adaptation to human, specialization for work, selection for companionship, and deliberate breeding for physical type. Its appearance influences what it can display, and its inherited behavioral tendencies influences what it is likely to perform. Its experience influences what it can understand, and the social environment influences whether communication succeeds. So let's return to the two dogs that we began with. The Siberian Husky and the Cavalier King's Spaniels belong to the same species, but they do not necessarily produce every part. This is why appearance matters. It is not simply a way of categorizing dogs as cute, elegant, powerful, strange, or wolf-like. Appearances is part of the communication system. It can offer clues about selective history. It can change the visibility of a signal. It can create ambiguity. And it can influence how easily two dogs understand one another. Once we recognize that socialization is something much more than placing your dog near as many other dogs as possible. It asks us to protect their ability to disengage while learning can happen. Because when subtle communication succeeds, dogs rarely need to become louder. Our responsibility is to notice those small conversations and create conditions in which they can work. The modern dog may be the most physically diverse mammal species on Earth, but beneath that extraordinary diversity is a shared social animal that is trying to gather information, predict behavior, avoid unnecessary conflict, and communicate through the body humans gave it. And that body matters. If dogs retain important juvenile characteristics into adulthood, also what does that mean for how we train them and live with them? This is what we will be covering on our next episode, and we will look into wolf family dynamics and understand why dogs need parents.